So let's begin the conversation from there, because the man who delivered the keynote address at that function is here, Oliver Barker-Vormawor. So what's the point? That what President Mahama has inaugurated, seeking to do, will not achieve the results we need?
I want to commend the committee that has been put up by the president. In particular, a number of individuals there, and Professor Kwesi Prempeh, whose progressive leanings nobody can doubt, and his views on constitutional reform in this country. I think that one of the things that we sought to do, and we call it the case for a new constitution at the event, was to push people's imagination beyond some of what we've seen within the conversations that has happened. Now, we admit willingly and immediately that the constituency around a new constitution idea is perhaps the smallest constituency that exists in this debate. But we think that our governance can be improved by testing ideas and testing the limits of what ought to be done. And we said that in the context of, we give two main propositions why, for all the things that we're trying to achieve, a new constitution is perhaps the better framework and perhaps a simpler approach. In particular, we laid out our concerns about the process of how this will take place. And we talked about the process particularly in light of why it has not been possible to achieve constitutional reform over the years until this day. In particular, constitutional reform that reflects the aspirations of so many Ghanaians and key ideas. We think that a new process is still going to face those challenges. One, about how we do the amendments themselves. The highest number of amendments I think we've done to the Constitution is 10 at a time in 1996 when the Accra-Rawlings issue happened. But the range of amendments that have been suggested, if you take the Constitution Review Commission's reports, there's over 229 provisions, I think, that affect the Constitution recommendations that they made. And then there were in total 473 that concerned, other administrative and legislative changes that have to happen broadly. The range of amendments that are being talked about are a lot. But beyond that as well, several of those provisions touch entrenched provisions. And there are some suggestions, some have suggested that is almost undemocratic to bundle up so many constitutional amendment questions and suggest that to referendum and ask Ghanaians to vote yes or no. So that's a process question that needs to be dealt with. There's also the question about the role of Parliament in the process, whether or not Parliament can tinker and change things within the Constitutional Amendment Bill. There are people outside of Parliament that hold the view that they can't, but Parliament itself holds the view that they can change things within it. It's unclear as to what effects the Council of State's views are to have on the amendment bill itself, whether the bill which is gazetted must be taken as it is wholesale without any changes to it. All those questions make the process more difficult and uncertain. Now, some of the key ideas driving the process now is about, for instance, like we talked about whether the president should continue to appoint ministers from within Parliament. Something that we know from history that Parliament is completely averse to. And even though there's a rising crescendo of voices who are calling for this, it must go through Parliament. And is Parliament going to look on for that to happen? That's the question we're going to see as the days unfold.
You suspect they will not agree?
I suspect that this is not going to happen. If they don't agree, then what is more likely to happen is that they're going to filibuster the process. So those are things that we need to avert our minds to. And we're saying that one of the ways in which you circumvent...
And filibuster means they will delay it.
They will delay it, the gratuity. Because unlike, for instance, the Article 106, which has clear timelines, well, after it leaves Parliament, this doesn't have that at Chapter 25. So you can stay for quite a long time in many ways. And then we have also talked about, so one of the ways in which you get around a lot of that process is to take all these recommendations, change the changes that you want to, and then present a holistic document to the people who have the sovereignty to make that decision. Now, I am not disputing that there are certain people who also hold the view that no, that is impossible with the current constitution we have. But we don't accept that as a democratic view anywhere in the world. If the Kenya, if taking Barbados, the people can come up at any time and propose for themselves a new constitution.
Yes, Professor Bochi holds that view.
Yes,
you cannot change.
That you cannot change it.
The constitution because of Article 3 that says that the constitution, if it's overthrown,
yes,
whatever it is. But my suggestion to him is that in that provision, it says, it talks about violent overthrow of the constitution.
Absolutely.
It doesn't talk about the people themselves agreeing that we want a new constitution and they cannot have it.
Absolutely. He and I have debated that view before. I mean, we talked about it, and I've hinted at the fact that the constitution's focus is violent or other unlawful means, which presumably means that non-violent and lawful means can enable this to happen. Okay. But that view continues to persist among some, at least. Then we've talked about the content itself. That when you take the Constitution, Chapter 25 divides the Constitution, as you know, into unentrenched and unentrenched. And you make changes, you amend these ones. How do you incorporate a new provision, for instance? So if there's a new idea, fresh idea that exists within the body of the Constitution, are you going to tag it to some existing provision within the Constitution? There's no mechanism for introducing new ideas. That is the defect we are talking about. That it doesn't allow you to read what problem are we trying to solve. And if the extent of that problem requires new ideas, this constitution closes the door to that. And we've talked about, so that's one of the things that we want everybody to think about. And I know that just suggesting new is, there's always the question, but we can always amend, We have said that the most pragmatic way for Ghanaians who are interested in constitution review amendment is not to be so attached to the date of the document, but what justice the document can enable us to do. In short words, without having to, I suppose, recanvass the positions that were made on that day. But yeah, I think that's the convention we're inviting in any respect.
And there are salient parts of the Constitution that attract your attention as the Democracy Hub.
Yes,
share those with us.
We set forth 16 grand ideas for constitutional remaking. Our first priority is what we call the Popular Initiative. And the Popular Initiative, we're looking at examples from other countries as well, where Ghanaians have the opportunity and chance to be involved in constitution reform and amendments going into the future. And what this means is that the constitution can set a threshold and said, if you gather a signature of, say, 10% of eligible voters, or 1 million Ghanaians sign a petition, the question can be put to referendum, whether or not the constitution should be amended in the way in which Ghanaians are calling for.
If you can take us through a list of that, instead of explaining your 16 grand ideas.
Okay. So that one. The second one we talked about was proportional representation, for instance, which changes the nature of parliament. The third idea we talked about was about the environment and our constitution's relationship to the environment and preparing us for some of the ecological challenges that are coming up and that we have to revise the framework for that. We talked about people's right to natural resources. We are demanding that all natural resources that are exploited, that there should be a 25% community participation in every lease that is granted as a way in which we ensure social justice. We talked about decentralization. In terms of how we decentralize, we shouldn't only focus on we shouldn't only focus on political decentralization by voting for DCs who have no money to operate, but that 40% of resources should be committed to local development. All development is local, after all. Which number am I on? We talked also about
separation of powers,
the separation of powers,
executive encroachment.
So we talked about the judiciary and reforming the judiciary. That the conversation should not be narrowed down to whether or not we cap the Supreme Court, but there has to be broader reforms on how to make it much more independent. For instance, better empowering the Judicial Council and reforming the Judicial Council in particular.
Abolishing the Council of State.
The abolishment of the Council of State is one we have called for. We think if we can go ahead and forget them and make appointments clearly, nobody even remembers that they exist. We've talked about
president must pay tax.
The need for the president.
Almost everybody agrees with you on that. The president must
pay tax. We've talked about the need for the indemnity provisions of the Constitution should be removed. Our point is that the Constitution cannot preach justice and then entrench impunity. We've called also for the fact that the president cannot be prosecuted after 3 years from leaving office.
If you can end on what you mean by end of wage apartheid.
So we've talked about the wage apartheid, and the wage apartheid, as we understand this, is the Article 71 framework, which allows certain individuals of Ghanaians to be within a particular class where they have, irrespective of whether the country is performing badly economically or whatever the situation may be, they're able to enhance for themselves allowances from periodically. And persons who serve the civil service in the public sectors across the length and breadth of this country do not have the same wage protections. That everybody must be put on single spine.
Okay.
Everybody must be on the national social security system as well. This is what ensures justice.
I'm laughing before I get to Yunus Hussaini. Everybody must be on social security.
Yes,
everybody must be on single spine. Will it work? Will